Welcome to the Alternative Investing Club. Today is June 28th, 2024, and our speaker today is Emily Courtright. Emily, welcome to the group.
Thank you, Daniel. I am honored to be here today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And you actually had two different topics that you had proposed, at least at first, and so I know you have a variety of interest there, but today you're going to be talking to us about mortgage note investing.
Yes, I am. So I'm actually with Keller Williams Realty, but I focus on the investing side and I teach wealth classes for Keller Williams offices across the country. So I do have a Rolodex of classes that I teach, but today is one that's near and dear to my heart because it is heavily focused on cash flow, which I think is a topic that a lot of people want to hear about.
Yeah, I agree. Cash flow is how you know that a particular investment is healthy. So I'll let you share your screen.
Okay, let's get started. I come over here. Okay, can you see it okay? Wonderful. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my parents, and my dad was telling us about how they had cake for him at work that day to celebrate his 30-year work anniversary. 30 years, same company, same job. And I just blurted out, "So when are you going to retire?" And his demeanor changed. He sat back in his chair and he said, "I can't retire right now because the markets are down." And I had this mix of confusion and disbelief because this was a man that had worked 30 years in a physically demanding, dirty job in a sewage plant. And he had been taught his whole life to invest in stocks and mutual funds, and that would provide for his retirement. But this was 2009. The markets were still rattled, and he was now handcuffed to his job. So I remember clearing the dishes with my mom, and all I could think about was, I don't know what I'm going to do different, but I'm not going to have my retirement years taken away from me like that. Fast forward, I followed the traditional path at first. I went to college, got a good job, moved around the country climbing the corporate ladder. I was an engineer with GE, General Electric, and it wasn't until they sold off the division that I was in that provided the kick in the butt that I needed to leave the corporate world. So at 28 years old, I left my corporate world behind, my engineering behind, to start a real estate investing business that would grow wealth for me instead of somebody else. At first, I did single family investing, flips, rentals, wholesales, and then similar to Monopoly, instead of buying up to hotels, I bought up to multifamily apartment complexes. So the last 7 years, my husband and I have invested heavily into the multifamily industry. And it wasn't until about the end of 2022, though, that we realized we were going to have a problem. We were looking at our financials, and we had just found out that more and more of our multifamily investments were stopping their cash flow distributions. The interest rates were rising, the market was shifting, debt looked differently, and so the investments that we had made were no longer cash flowing like they were. And literally thousands of dollars a month was gone from our income. We looked at each other after doing our financials, and we knew that we had one chunk of money left to deploy, left to invest. And we said, this money has to cash flow. Like, it has to. Because as full-time investors, our cash flow from our investments pays for diapers and daycare and mortgage and groceries. And so it was important that this last chunk of money had to cash flow. Within about 2 months of that conversation, I know it was meant to be. I was literally sitting in your chairs, listening to a training class and learning for the first time ever about mortgage notes. And that class literally changed our lives because it showed us the power and the benefits that note investing provides. And what I have discovered over the last year and a half is that out of all the types of investing I've done in the last 11 years, note investing has provided the most cash flow in the least amount of time with the least amount of effort. So my name is Emily Courtright, and I believe that everyone on this call today has the ability to create massive amounts of cash flow for you and your family by investing in mortgage notes. And so today, for the next 40 minutes, I'm going to cover the three most important topics: principles, process, and preparation. Before I do that, a quick disclaimer. This session is not intended to provide legal, financial, or tax advice, and I'm going to show some of my examples, but that individual results may vary. And then the views and information expressed are my own and not necessarily representative of the Alternative Investing Club.
Thank you
So
for
let's
putting
jump.
that there. I
Absolutely.
ask every presenter to do that, and maybe 1 out of 20 do.
Well, I try to follow directions. So um, let's jump into principles. And the reason principles are important is because notes are a little different than some of the other asset classes that you may have heard about or invested in the past. Now, Robert Kiyosaki says that the most important word in the world of money is cash flow. And most of us think that in order to get cash flow, you have to buy rental properties or you have to invest in some real estate or funds or things like that. And sometimes when you ask people, well, why don't you have more rentals? Why don't you have more cash flowing assets? They say it's because they don't have enough time. They say, I don't have time to go learn it. I don't have time to go find the deals. And what I've discovered is that single family investing and even multifamily investing does take a lot of time. It takes sweat equity. You got to find the good deals. You got to run them. You got to rehab them. And not everybody has the time for that. Well, I'm going to show you today how notes can get you that same or better cash flow without having to go buy rental properties and without dealing with tenants and toilets. Because a lot of investors today are struggling with finding good deals, profiting in uncertain markets, and making money for both today and over time. Now, if you would have told me that I would be the lender on this beautiful house in Fort Lauderdale, if you would have told me that 5 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. But today, I am the lender on this house. And it is amazing that normal people like you and me, we can buy mortgages, we can become the lender on great assets that pay out a very, very consistent income. So I'm really excited to share how we do that today. So overall, notes allows you to create monthly cash flow. I'm going to show you that right here coming up. Build up your retirement fund and create legacy and wealth for you and your family. So let's talk about the process. There are 3 different strategies in note investing. The first one we're going to talk about is buying existing performing notes. Now, let's break that down. One, we're buying them. So we're like buying the notes on the secondary market. There's a platform, you go and you say, I want to buy, and there's lenders that say, I want to sell. Existing means that the note is already in place. So it might have been being paid on for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years, maybe just for 3 years, but it is an already existing mortgage. Performing means that it is getting paid. So the homeowner is paying their mortgage every month consistently. So let's take one step back and just cover what is a mortgage. A mortgage note is terms of an agreement. You've got your loan amount, you've got your interest rate, and you have your amortization. How long? Is it 20 years, 15? Is it 30 year? And those 3 things boil down to a monthly payment. So the homeowner owes this monthly payment every month. And for the lender, what it means is long-term payback that is secured by a piece of collateral. And today's examples, we're going to talk about the collateral being a single family house. So a single family piece of real estate. And so if something happens, the borrower stops paying, then you would essentially get the house back. We're going to talk a little bit about the risks later. So let's go through this example. Let's say when I bought this note on the house in Fort Lauderdale that it had 20 years left. So I buy it, and then January comes along, I get January's payment, I get February's, March, April. Every month, the borrower's mortgage payment goes into my bank account And essentially, I have worked one time to achieve a long-term cash flow. And literally, when I say working one time, like the amount of hours I put into buying that note was probably less than 10, maybe 5 hours to buy that note and get it set up. And then I get to enjoy cash flow for the next 20 years. So let's jump into an actual example so I can show you some numbers. This is another house that I bought the note on. It's in San Antonio. And this house is worth $130,000. Now, what I like to see is I like to see the borrower, the owner, have some equity in the house. And this one is a great example of that. So the owner has 58% equity, which means their mortgage is only at 42% of the house value, which is really, really good and really safe in my terms. And so let's look at this mortgage. This homeowner has $54,000 left on their mortgage at 8.5% interest, and they have 12 and a half years left on their loan. So let's say it started as a 15-year mortgage, and now they've paid 2.5 years, and they have 12 and a half left. Overall, their payment is $585 a month. So when I buy this mortgage, I am buying $585 a month to come in. Now, this lender has to make the decision to sell the note. And usually the notes are sold at a discount. And you say, well, why would the lender want to sell the note? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, they want their money back today instead of the long-term cash flow. And two, this lender has actually taken some of the highest the highest interest payments of the entire note. So if you think about an amortization table, the interest is always highest at the beginning. So this lender collected payments for 2.5 years. They got the best interest payments, and now they say, well, I think I want most of my money back. But they're not going to sell it for 54. They're going to sell it at a discount. So let's see what that would look like. So we've got our 54,000 at 8.5%. We've got 150 payments. That's 12 and a half years of $585 a month. But instead of paying 54,000, I paid 46. So that comes out to an $8,000 discount. Now you say, well, does that change the mortgage? No, it doesn't change the mortgage. The only thing that the borrower sees, the homeowner sees, if you've ever bought a house with a mortgage and then 1 or 2 months later, you get a letter in the mail saying, oh, instead of paying this servicer, now you need to pay this servicer because your loan was sold. That's all the borrower sees. And we've personally gotten those letters a few times. So the mortgage balance doesn't change, but what I paid for it and isn't ever disclosed to the borrower. So if the borrower were to sell their house tomorrow, I would make $54,000 as the lender because that is still their remaining balance on their loan. Now, by me buying it at $46,000, that $585 a month will feel like an 11.7% return because I got it at a discount. And if the homeowner doesn't sell early, if they just pay it off over the next 12 and a half years, then I will earn back $87,000 in payments over the next 12 and a half years. That's the 585 times 150. So let's talk a little bit about cushion. I'll get to some of the questions here before we transition. So the full property value, you always want to look at the investment dollars in a note. So for this, my cost of the note was $46,000. And so I have a cushion between 46 and 130. So let's say this homeowner has a hardship, they have to move out, I have to take the house back, and I have to do a fire sale and sell it at 80,000 or 60,000. I'm still well exceeding the amount of money that I have in the deal. And so personally, my threshold is around 70% of what the house is worth. So I don't want to be in any deal for more than 70% of what the house is worth. Now, the property I showed you in Fort Lauderdale, on that one, I'm in for about 200,000 and the house is worth 850. So if that homeowner were to stop paying their mortgage payments, I would get the house back and it would be worth $850,000. So it's a really, really powerful way to have a cash flow stream that is secured by a great piece of real estate. So let's talk about leverage, because this was another thing that I didn't know you could do. And this really blew my mind. And when I show you how my retirement account is doing this, I think it's gonna like blow some minds here. So most people don't realize that when you have a note, you have a series of payments. Let's say you have 20 years of payments. You have the ability as the lender to sell the front amount of payments. And you can sell, and it doesn't matter how many, you can sell any number of payments. You could sell 5 years, you could sell 10 years, you could sell 7 years. You have the ability to sell off a certain number of payments on your mortgage. And you say, well, why would I want to do this? Well, as the lender, the reason I would want to do this is to get some of my money back, but still have an ownership in the note. So let's look at what this means, because I did it with this San Antonio note. And this strategy is called a partial. So if you were talking to other note investors, the term you would use to talk about this is a partial. And I want to give you a visual, because partials are like pizzas. Let's say you go to Little Caesars and you buy a large pizza for $6 and you take it to your kid's soccer game and you sell off to a couple of the friends a few pieces at $2 a piece. Now, what have you essentially done? You have gotten your money back, you have recouped your $6, and you still own half a pizza. You still have something to enjoy. So this is almost exactly like partials, except in the partial world, I get my money back, but I have deferred my payments. Now, one thing that I do still own is I still own the discount that I bought the note at. So in my example, the $8,000 discount, I'm not selling that to my partial investor. I still own that. And if the note were to get paid off tomorrow, I would make my $8,000. So let's look at an example. So I bought the San Antonio note, 12 and a half years, $585 a month. I invested $46,000 and I sold 8.5 years of the payments for $45,000. So how much do I have left in the deal? I have $1,000 left in the deal. And what do I own? I own 4 years of payments, and I own the $8,000 discount that I bought the note at. And you said, well, who would buy 8.5 years for $45,000? This is your typical passive investor. This is somebody who just wants to hand their funds over and say, earn me a decent return. Most of our passive investors in our notes are closer to retirement age. They are investing with their retirement accounts. Some are investing with cash because they need the consistent monthly cash flow. We do have one investor that's my age. She's a busy working professional, full-time pilot. Her retirement account has bought a partial. One of the other reasons that you have passive investors are maybe different than what I would call me, the active investor, or my retirement account, is not all passive investors want to be in a deal for 20 years or 15 years or 12 and a half years. And so they are looking for something shorter term. They want 8, 7 years, 9 years, something that's a little bit more in the foreseeable future. And you say, well, what is the return for that passive investor? For ours, we set the returns at 7%. And so it's decent. It's a number that for doing nothing and doing none of the work, it meets needs for a lot of people. And you say, well, what's my return? As the active investor. As the active investor, it's almost hard to calculate. It's very, very high. And the reason is because, we'll walk through this. I invested $46,000. I got $45,000 back. I now own future cash flows and a discount. And now I can take the 45,000 that's back in my bank account, in this case, my self-directed retirement account, and I can go buy another note. I can go buy another note for $45,000 and I can do this again. And literally my self-directed retirement account is doing this over and over and over again. So I might do this 4 or 5 times a year within my same self-directed retirement account using the same money that I start. Let's just say I start with 100,000. I am recycling the same 100,000. And so by using this method, you can literally skyrocket your returns in just with performing notes, whether you buy it in your retirement account or with cash. I'm going to take a break before we go to the next category, and I'm going to look at some of the questions.
Oh, feel
Or
free to, I'd be
keep
happy to
going.
read them off and keep track of
Okay.
them.
Okay.
So we have from Glenn, he's asking, what percentage do service chargers charge?
Great question. So there is a third-party loan servicer in between me and the borrower, and they charge between $20 and $30 a month flat fee per note. And so that is, I would say, industry standard. Now, what's really great is sometimes, like when you originate the notes, and sometimes when it's an owner finance note, it is built into the note that the borrower pays that. So we probably have 6 or 7 of the 25 notes we've bought where the borrower is paying that loan servicing fee every month. And I see the question, are you buying primary bank loans in first position or from secondary markets? So they're all first position, first of all, that I'm buying. And we are buying through 2 different ways. We're buying through public websites, which is like a Craigslist for note sales. So it's like a buyer beware kind of thing. And then we are also buying through what are called trade desks or note brokers. And so I'll talk more about note brokers here at the end.
All right. Justin is asking, I like mortgage note markets a lot. I've never actually invested on my own like Emily is doing, but I did invest with a passive sponsor that does all the due diligence, underwriting, servicing, etc. They pay a preferred return according to their investors. Okay, that wasn't much of a question, but it was a good statement.
Right. And that's
If
similar to what we're doing. We're doing the analysis, the due diligence, we're buying the note, and then we have investors that we sell X number of payments to so that we can recoup some money, but also feed our investors' needs as well.
Okay. Glenn's asking a question about, do you sell a partial, which I think you answered already, so I'll skip that one. What category? Jalon is asking, what's the category of income that this falls under? Is this
Great,
taxes, ordinary taxes?
great question. So it does fall into interest income. And so that is one reason why a lot of people do it through their retirement accounts, their self-directed retirement accounts. But we also personally invest in our cash because we need cash flow for our personal life. And so I'm willing to, my average note yields me 10 to 12% interest. And so I am okay paying some taxes on that because it's still better than what I can get on other vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Brooke is asking, can you talk a little bit about some of the risks and maybe an
Yeah.
example of a transaction that did not go so well?
Right. So some of the risks, there's really 3 different things that could happen. If the borrower comes across a hardship and let's say they can no longer pay their mortgage payment, you have a couple different avenues. One, you're the lender and you can go to them and you can say, okay, you can no longer afford $1,000 a month. How about $800? How about $700? You could do what's called a loan modification and you find a number that works for them. And I will tell you, the lender is always going to win in the end. So even if that payment comes down to 700, they might add 10 years to the payment, or they might add a $20,000 balloon at the end of the payment, which would essentially just be owed when the house was sold if it was still 30 years away. And so you could do a loan modification. That's always an option. You could offer what's called, kind of in the single family world, a cash for keys, except this is like a cash for deed. So you could say, you know what? How about you just deed me back the property? I don't want to go through the foreclosure process. Neither do you. And How about we just make an agreement and you deed me over the property, and now you own the property and you can do with it what you'd like. You can turn it into a rental, you can fire sale it, you can flip it, you can do whatever you want. And then the third option would be foreclosure. And I take the stance of I'm the business owner. So I do not know how to foreclose on people. I would hire a foreclosure attorney to do that for me. So I'm going to leverage all of the professional services that I can if I have to go through that. I have not had to go through that. We've bought 25 notes. The only thing that we've had to do so far is one homeowner came across a hardship, and through the loan servicing company, they actually came to me and said, we'd like to submit her file to the state of Michigan for some housing assistance funds. And so they worked with the borrower to do that. And the state of Michigan paid 6 months of her mortgage. She was like back owed 4 months, and they prepaid 2 more months. And so those payments came in one fell swoop from the state. And then it got to the point where she was ready to pay again, and she did start making her mortgage payments. So as a lender, you do have a lot of leverage, and you are always in the best position to negotiate with the borrower. I did see the comment about, well, wouldn't it be better to be the active? Absolutely. It would be better to be the active, but not everybody wants to take 20 hours and go learn a new investing strategy. My husband and I, when we saw the power in notes, we said, I want to learn that strategy. And now, knowing what we know, notes is going to be part of our strategy for the next 20, 30 years. What's the
Tara,
minimum amount? Yeah, go ahead.
well, go ahead. I was going to say, William is asking, what's the minimum amount um, for an investment? Where to
So
go?
it varies, actually. I'm going to talk about minimum amounts for notes here at the end. With the partials I've sold, the lowest dollar one has been $6,500, and the highest one has been $110.
Okay, so you're mostly talking about houses which are beginner houses or starting houses, or is there a variety of different types of houses that these are collateralized against?
I would say most of the houses that our notes are collateralized by are starter slash single family homes, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 250, $300,000 value, except for the Fort Lauderdale one. But overall, affordable homes in good areas. And we'll talk
Yeah.
in a little bit about, saw somebody mention criteria. Location is a big criteria for me. I don't want it to be too rural, because if I need services, I want to call somebody up, and I want to be able to have somebody drive there within 30 to 60 minutes from a major metroplex. So I don't want to buy something that's 3 hours from the nearest small town, because I want to be able to have services there as a lender if I need them. But then I also look at the borrower's payment history. So I want to be sure that they have paid on time if my goal is to buy a performing note. Then we also look at the title report. So we confirm that we are in the first position. We confirm there's no other liens on the property.
Okay. Tara is asking about what a typical ROI for a passive investor is.
So it's a 7% yield. So that's like an interest rate return. So the passive investor is earning interest, and but it's amortized. So the cash flow is going to feel higher. It's going to feel somewhere between 10 to 14%, because the cash flow includes principal and interest coming back. But just the interest portion, that is the 7% portion.
And then Arun is asking for a little bit of a clarification around the idea of selling partials. He says, after you sell the partials, is it you're only receiving cash flow in the later years of the deal? And I would add to that, how do you decide how many payments to sell off?
So you could do it a couple different ways. So the first question, you can sell off the entire payment, but there are also other structures you can use to sell off a portion of the payment. So you get to decide. It's kind of like your chalk and your chalkboard. It's infinite number of possibilities. And so, for example, if the payment coming in is $1,000 a month, I could have the option to sell off the whole 1,000, or I could only sell off 800 if I wanted, or 900. I could choose to keep a certain amount just to cover some of my overhead costs during the year. Now, to your question, Daniel, I want to recoup a majority of my funds. That is my goal. So I will try to sell as long of a partial as I can, as my investors will be able to like, as long as there's demand for that. For example, we've only sold one partial that's been 15 years. That might have been on a 30-year mortgage because I don't have a lot of investors that want a 15-year product. And so I am trying to recoup, as the active investor, I'm trying to recoup at least 90 to 95% of my original investment. So that's really what I look at it to do.
All right. Glenn is asking for a little more information where you find note brokers. He's asking which Craigslist, Yield Street, Paperstack, or something else.
So Paperstack is the one that the public one I've used the most. There's another one called Scottsdale Mortgage that has a note trade desk. The one that Notes Direct is another website. And another one is Scottsdale Mortgage, Revolve Capital.
Did you say One Eye Notes Direct?
No, notesdirect.com.
Just Notes Direct.
Mm-hmm.
If the group could help me and find links to those places and throw them in the chat, that'd be appreciated.
I see Kay's question about the 10 to 12% return per year or per month. So that is an annualized return, but as you get your principal back, like that is the interest that you get on that principal that you have remaining left in the deal. So that is, I would say, short answer, it's an annualized return.
All right. And then Brett has a question. Actually, TK has a question here. How are current interest rates affecting the note business right now?
So the notes that we're buying have already been in existence. And so it's more about the investor demand that is, we are able to buy notes at a 10 to 12% yield for like the active investor right now. Now, if investor demand goes, if supply goes way up and demand goes down, then we may get them at better deals. It's kind of, it doesn't necessarily correlate to the interest rate that a homeowner is paying to buy their mortgage, to buy a house right now. It's more about like a cap rate or an investment to value that is in the investment side of the market. And then if a homeowner misses the payment, are you liable to pay the investors? So there's different ways to structure it. And as the active investor, you can choose if you want to take on the liability of paying your passive investor if the homeowner doesn't pay. So it can actually be structured both ways. And we do have some notes that are structured where we have guaranteed the payments. And then we have other notes where it's structured where if the homeowner doesn't pay, I don't owe you money. So as the active investor, you get to choose which way you want to structure it. So let's talk
as the
about
passive investor, you get to choose which structure you're going to go. Right.
Yeah, whether you accept that structure or not. Yeah. So let's talk about the second way. This one is creating private mortgage notes. And when I say creating, meaning you are originating them. And you may have heard of this before. It's really another term for seller financing or owner financing. And I want to give you one of my examples. But first, a quick research. We are currently in one of the highest deltas between rental price and how much you would pay to own a house in the standard US market. And so for example, if rent was $2,000 in somewhere USA, to own a house is $3,000. And so that's $1,000 difference. And so the point here and what I'm going to show in my case study is that by being by doing an owner finance sale and becoming the lender, you can actually make more than you could by being the landlord. So let me show you this case study. This was a rental property that I bought back in 2016. I've owned it since then, paid $75,000. I've had built up a lot of equity in it. And this tenant literally lived there for 7 years. And so she just moved out earlier last year. So instead of selling it outright, I sold it with owner financing. So I created a note. I became the lender. I sold it for $220,000 with $20,000 down. So $20,000 in my pocket, loan amount of $200,000. Her interest rate is 9.75% for 30 years. So that all boils down to a $1,713 a month mortgage payment for the homeowner. Now, let me show you the numbers. If I would have held this as a rental, if I would have gotten another tenant in it, I would have been able to charge $1,900 a month in rent. That's that disparity, that $1,900 versus what she's actually paying. She's paying $1,700 plus taxes plus insurance it's close to $1,000. I would have all these fees as a landlord, and I would before any mortgage payment, I would net $1,200 a month. As the lender, I bring in $1,713. The only charge that I would have to pay is the loan servicer. But in this case, because I originated the note, I put it in there that the borrower is going to pay the loan servicing fee. And so now I'm actually cash flowing the entire $1,713 a month. So it's almost $500 more per month by being the lender than I was by being the landlord. So I increase my cash flow. I also save money on taxes. So instead of selling this property outright and getting a huge gain, by being the lender, you are taxed as an installment sale. And so I was just reviewing my tax return, and my taxable load on this sale of this house is $12,000, which I can easily offset with other expenses and things like that. And so the installment sale just taxes you on the money that comes in that year. So I'm definitely saving in a couple different ways by keeping this house and turning my equity into a mortgage note. So the money that I would have made by selling it outright, I've turned that into a mortgage note that pays me 9.75%. And a lot of people say, well, you've given up your appreciation. You no longer are going to get an appreciating asset. You're right, but I'm going to make $100,000 in interest over the next 5 years. We talked about lenders making more interest at the beginning. The next 5 years, $100,000 in interest. And personally, I don't think this house is going to appreciate another $100,000 in the next 5 years. It did over the last 5 years because we were in a big boom cycle, but I'm positive that I'm making out better by being the lender in this case.
You know, the other really nice benefit about lending over large periods of time like that is that instead of inflation eroding your purchasing power, inflation is actually causing the dollars that you're receiving in the future to be, that you're paying back to be, well, the future dollars are worth less, and so you have an advantage of inflation going for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we move on, I'll answer a couple more questions. What happens if the borrower refinances? So at that point, the loan is paid off. And so if you're talking about whether it's in the performing or the creating private notes, if the borrower refinances or sells their home, you are the lender of record. So the title company, when they pull title, they will see you as the lender. They'll actually reach out to the loan servicing company and get the payoff statement, and you will get paid the loan balance that is due to you. The interest rate seems really high. What accounts for that? So when you sell owner financing, a lot of times you are selling to somebody who cannot qualify for a traditional mortgage. So in the case of this particular borrower, she runs a catering company. She gets paid cash. She doesn't report all of that cash on her tax returns. And so she literally cannot go to a normal bank and get an FHA or conventional loan because her tax returns just don't support it. But her income does. And so when you sell something owner financing, you are really looking for what my mentor calls a penalty box buyer. It's somebody who doesn't report all their income on their tax returns, maybe has a lot of gig economy kind of incomes, a foreign national, ITIN borrowers. They just don't meet the requirements for FHA and conventional, but they can afford the mortgage. And typically the other thing is they need to have a down payment. And so it's usually a minimum of 10% down payment, sometimes up to 20%. And so that is really their skin in the game. They can put up the 20,000 down payment. They can put up 30,000 down payment because they don't have the tax returns to support a true FHA or a conventional loan. And to
Would you
that
like,
point, go ahead,
go
Daniel.
ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, would you like me to read a few more questions?
Oh, that's okay. It says to that point, there is not always a lot of refinance. Typically when somebody's kind of in that mode of not reporting on tax returns and making cash under the table, it's highly unlikely that they're going to refi. What is more likely is that they just sell the house. They live there for a few years, they decide they're moving, family things happen, and they sell, and then you get paid off at the sale of the house.
We had one question which has been asked a couple of times,
Mhm.
and that is, how do you take money from your retirement account? I thought you weren't able to touch it until you reached retirement age.
Oh, great question. So I worked at General Electric, GE Aviation, and when I left my retirement account, which was at 150,000 at that point, I was then eligible to roll it into a self-directed retirement account. Now, I will say if you are with Intel and you've been with Intel for 30 years or 20 years and you have an Intel retirement account and you are still there, you are not eligible to use those funds. They cannot be moved into self-directed. It is only after you leave a company. So if you have a previous employer where you had retirement funds, then you are eligible to take those retirement funds and put it into what's called a self-directed account. And that self-directed account allows you to invest in private entities. So you could invest in the fund that's getting put together. You can invest in oil and gas royalties. You can invest in notes. You can invest in rental real estate. Anything. You can invest in almost any private investing strategy. And so that's what I've done. I've taken my old GE retirement account. It was a 401k, put it into self-directed, and now it's invested in real estate and notes. Okay, let's do the third section. The third section is buying non-performing notes. And this one's a little bit different because non-performing means they are not paying. So this is a whole separate strategy. You don't have to do this one, or you can do multiple strategies.
And Emily, let me just give you an upfront warning that we've got
Yep.
10 minutes left.
Okay. And so with these non-performing notes, I'm actually just going to jump into the example because the foreclosure related filings are increasing. COVID, everything was kind of put on hold, but now lenders are finally saying like, yeah, it's time to pay. So there's notes that haven't been paid on in 7 years, 10 years. This particular one has a market value of 110,000. It had a loan balance of 33, and all in, my husband and I bought this one at $23,000. And so when they're not paying, you get the note at an even bigger discount. And just to talk through the process, the lender didn't even start the actual foreclosure process. They really just threatened foreclosure. And then they did that last April. We bought the note in July. We paid $23,000 for it. And what I liked about this was the story. And the story was this was a divorce, which isn't a good story, but it was a divorce and nobody was living there. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a house that was vacant, which means they just need to sell it or get it off the books. Nobody is using it as a primary residence. And so we negotiated with the divorce attorneys. We negotiated the payoff down to $5,000 if they would pay within 30 days. Again, the lender has always the best negotiating power. And so within 30 days, got my 23 back, made another 5, and we were out of the deal. And so you can essentially flip notes. It's kind of similar to flipping houses, but you're flipping notes. And this is a short-term strategy that allows you to build capital quickly. And again, you can do this with your self-directed retirement fund as well. Now, one of my colleagues, Sophia Jones, she does another strategy with non-performings. She buys them and she gets them re-performing. So she calls the borrower and she says, I know you haven't paid your mortgage in 10 years, but there's a new sheriff in town and I want to help you out. How can we get you back to paying your mortgage? And she works with them to reestablish their loan payments. And once they have made those payments for a year or so, well, now she has a note that is worth more, and she has the option to either sell the note at a profit to what she paid for it, or she can keep it for cash flow. So not all non-performing strategies are like doom and gloom foreclosure. Some of them are more let's keep you in the house and get you repaying. And so we invest in notes because of the long-term cash flow that we've got baby boomer parents that are going to probably need some financial and physical assistance in the next 10 to 20 years. And so notes provides us the cash flow for the future to support that, and also the cash flow for today to do the charity efforts that we want to do throughout the year. Mostly we work with Charitable Love. Now let's talk about preparation, because a lot of people say, well, how do you buy 25 notes in a year and, still do other things? Robert Kiyosaki, the second half of his sentence says the second most important word in the world of money is leverage. And so I have leveraged an organization called Note School. And Note School has over 2,000 students. Eddie Speed is the leader of that. He's done over 50,000 note deals over the last 40 years. This is his industry. And what he gets, we're talking about how do you find notes. Well, Eddie gets the good notes that come to him. He is out there and he's connected with all of the note brokers, the hedge funds, the note sellers. And this is an example of a list of 40 notes that came to him. I got to buy 5 of these notes. So 5 of these came into my portfolio. They were the first 5 that I bought. And what's really cool, and this was brought up, is that there are solutions for investors with smaller amounts. And so even in this list, 31 of the notes were under 50,000, 17 were under 25. And from this, I bought the a $5,000 note, I bought a $25,000 note, I bought a $35,000 note. So not all notes have to be expensive. And what notes provide for us is diversity and the cash flow, which allows us to fund our lives. So just in the past 3 months, with, I would say, minimal efforts and time invested, we have brought in over 17,000. We've had 2 notes sell in the last few months that we bought last year. So this kind of goes off to the statistical numbers that people sell, they move all the time. And so 2 notes that I bought last year have already paid off. One of them I had a $2,000 discount, so I got that $2,000. Overall, it's an average of a 25% cash flow for the money that we've invested in the deals. And so what I showed you is that notes can provide cash flow for today and over time. And it's really the perfect fit for somebody looking for cash flow for a self-directed retirement account or their cash that they have sitting aside. And the reason now is important is because not all asset classes are cash flowing very well these days. I know personally my single family and my single family and multifamily in my market is not cash flowing like it used to. And so what would deals like this look like in your portfolio, and how would that benefit? So I want to invite you to a free masterclass, and this is a Rich Rewards in Notes masterclass to see if note investing can be something that could benefit your portfolio. And it's going on Wednesday, July 10th. So it's after the holiday, after 4th of July, it's virtual live. You don't have to leave your house, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. And a few of the gifts that you'll get some note investing process maps, which are step-by-step instructions on how to buy and invest in notes and sell partials. You'll get an ebook and a white paper called Why Partials Are a Game Changer for Self-Directed IRA, and a partial note calculator. So you can see how powerful partials are if you were to sell a portion of a note that you would buy. And so you have a couple investing options. You can say, nope, notes aren't for me, and that's okay. You can invest passively in notes with my company. We have options as low as short as 13 months. And as long, like I said, the longest has been 15 years. The average is probably 9 or 10. But 13 months, 3 years, we have short-term options, we have long-term options. I'd be happy to talk to you about those if you are interested. Or you can also pursue full, like being the active investor. And in that case, Note School is the top training and education company that offers note investing that I've ever found. So to reserve your seat, you can either go to noteschool.com/AIC, like Alternative Investing Club, or you can scan the QR code here. And whether you are a beginning investor, whether you have a small portfolio, or whether you are a seasoned investor, I truly believe that notes will take your investing portfolio to the next level. I know for us, we have transitioned to about 30% of our portfolio into notes because of their ability to cash flow amazingly. And just one final thought, my dad was finally able to retire, and for years, the stock markets flourished until COVID hit. And when COVID hit, he was reminded again that his nest egg was completely out of his control. And so he finally came to us and said, what are you investing in? What can I do? And so at 72 years old, I'm so proud to say that my dad made his first alternative investment of his life last year into notes. And so it took him 72 years to take control of his finances, but it's the decision to change and to do something different from the status quo that's the secret to success and the first step towards your financial freedom. And I know that you deserve financial freedom where you don't have to worry if the stock markets are up or down. You deserve financial freedom where there's no limit to the quality time you can spend with your family. And you deserve financial freedom where you can live every day to the fullest. So you deserve financial freedom, and notes can help get you there. So I'm going to open it up. Here's all my contact information. I want to see if there's any other questions that I didn't get to answer. Any particular reason why the notes you purchased are in Texas? Well, one, Texas is a landlord and lender friendly state. So it is easy to foreclose in Texas. I only want to buy notes where the foreclosure timeline is short. So lender friendly states, I'm not buying in California, New York, New Jersey, places where people can kind of play the system and it would take me a year or 2 years to foreclose. In Texas, I could probably foreclose within 90 days.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute.
Yes, I have a question. During the COVID period and people wasn't paying, how did that affect your investments?
So I just started buying notes a little under 2 years ago. So I didn't own them during COVID. I do think that during COVID, there was a little bit more of a general understanding, like we're going to work with you. But there were a lot of notes in what the chart was going to show was that there were a lot of notes where people just stopped paying and they never restarted. And so today, the lenders are looking back and saying, oh my gosh, this borrower hasn't paid since 2020. And they literally haven't paid in 4 years. And so the inventory of foreclosure or like the inventory of non-performing notes is kind of skyrocketing as well, because lenders are finally realizing like, oh my gosh, this person never restarted their payments after COVID.
All right. Could everybody take themselves off of mute and thank Emily for coming in and speaking to us today?
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, guys.
Emily.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was an awesome
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a
I
really
hope
good
to see you guys
presentation.
again sometime.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And we'll see you again next Friday, noon Pacific time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.